Well, what better place to talk about sustainability than traveling to the epicenter of a crisis? Welcome to the Colorado River Basin. I'm joined joined by Heather Tanana, two very distinguished experts here with me with authority. Heather Tanana comes from Salt Lake City, another fast-growing city here in the Southwest, facing major water shortages. She's a professor of law at the University of Utah and an expert in tribal and water affairs. She's also a citizen of the Navajo Nation. And Kathryn Sorensen as well from Arizona State, but very used to managing scarcity. She's the former general manager of Phoenix Water. So just to tee this up just a bit, Dylan mentioned, I think we all know this, I know the audience here, the Colorado River is imperiled. 40 million people, countless farms depend on this. We are seeing right in this suburb that we are right now, major water shortages from the river. Deliveries are being cut just to the north of us. 15-minute drive to the north of us, people don't have water coming out of their taps. This is not a Western problem. This is an international problem. And Kathryn, I thought it sort of put you on the spot. But for those of us who are coming from elsewhere, you know, it's been my observation, I've told you this before, we're sort of traveling around Phoenix. It feels pretty business as usual. This is, you know, home construction is booming. Why is this not a 5-alarm fire?
Well, let me assure you that here in Arizona, water is always a 5-alarm fire. All we have is hot and dry. That's what we got. Ironically, maybe not today. It's a little cold and cloudy. And to whoever flew in and brought that with you, thank you, I guess. But, you know, we are aware this is a desert. And we need to be careful and play the long game out here because knee-jerk or reactive or media-grabbing actions aren't necessarily the most productive. So instead, we plan methodically and proactively to avoid emergency situations because we know that Phoenix is held to a higher standard. We know that if we cannot continue reliable water deliveries, that investment in our economy will grind to a halt. Let me give you just a really quick example of that. So there's a lot of attention in the media right now about lawn buyback programs or other, you know, I'll just call them sexy programs. Water is almost never sexy, but, and you know, here in Phoenix, what we tried instead was we focused on changing the culture and we focused on changing the price of water to reflect its scarcity. So back in the 1970s, when I grew up, 80% of single-family homes had majority turf landscapes. Today in Phoenix, that number hovers around 10%. We didn't get a lot of media attention for that. People probably felt like it was business as usual, but it was effective.
You talk about some of the conservation measures, but the fact is farming takes a lot of water across the basin. Could you briefly set up some of the, you know, put into context some of the shortages that we're seeing right now?
Right. So unfortunately for Central Arizona, the water that we import off the Colorado River through the Central Arizona Project Canal into the areas of Phoenix and Tucson is what is lower in priority than the water that's used in Western Arizona and in California. And so that means that when there are shortages on the Colorado River and there's not enough water to go around, that we take those cuts first. Those cuts so far have primarily fallen on some of the farmers here in Central Arizona who have lower priority water rights than the cities and the tribes. But we do expect that as Colorado River shortages become more severe, that both cities and tribes in Central Arizona will be affected. But like I said, we do plan for this. And Central Arizona is blessed to have vast groundwater resources that we have managed carefully through our 1980 Groundwater Management Act that we can fall back on. But use of that groundwater entails its own trade-offs. To the extent we use too much of it now and do not replenish those aquifers, we really foreclose on opportunities for future generations. And so we need to keep an eye on that.
We're sitting at this very, I think, time where entities and people and states are seeing who the first person is going to be to blink at the negotiations. It's been in the news lately, right? California did not agree to what was proposed by the 6 other states. But Heather, Tanana, give us a little bit of historical context here as we're seeing more and more entities and interests and businesses jockeying for a shrinking river. This story could be told all around the world right now with climate change. So I'm wondering if you could step back for a second and talk about some of the historical inequities at play here and what might concern you as these negotiations move forward, or if this almost inevitably may be in the legal battle.
Yeah, well, in the United States, those who have been most impacted by climate change, those who are facing water insecurity right now, they're the same groups that historically have been taken advantage of. They've been oppressed. We heard the statement earlier that a lot of Americans, well, not a lot, 1% actually don't have clean water access into their homes. Well, of that 1%, the vast majority are Black, Latino, and Native American families. In the United States, if you are Black or Latino, you're twice as likely to lack water access. If you're Native American, you're 19 times less likely to have water coming in your home. And so historically, the federal government spent a lot of time and money investing in infrastructure, but that infrastructure went to benefit predominantly white Americans. And when we look at the Colorado River management, what would refer to as the law of the river, over the past 100 years, the people who were making decisions about how water would be allocated, once again, predominantly white male Americans. So tribes for really until the last, I'd say, 5 years or so, were not really involved in any of those discussions at all.
And the law of the river, as you say, was set up at a time when that we are now learning was very wet in the West, right? And this is coming to roost now. We're 23 years into a mega drought, and some people think maybe we shouldn't call it a mega drought anymore because that implies that it might end.
You know, I think that's fair to say, but many people also will argue the contrary, that since the 1922 compact that we've been over allocating water to begin with. And certainly more than 50 years ago, we should have realized that we had a math problem. So again, this narrow-minded viewpoint in water management has been that the water is a commodity to be divided up without these diverse viewpoints to protect other interests that might be at stake too.
Right, the adage is use it or lose it, and so there's very little incentive for people to conserve. So we have this situation where the headwaters of the Colorado River, the Colorado Rockies, 3 degrees Fahrenheit or more temperature change, or temperatures heating up since 1980, I think. I think some people in the news media say I think. I should say I know this. Yet, you're in Utah, one of the fastest growing states along the Wasatch Front. Kathryn, we're here in Phoenix, also one of the fastest growing states and one of the fastest metropolitan areas. Where do you see this going? Because I don't see, I might metaphorically see a sign saying no Californians allowed at the Arizona state line, but people are moving here. We're in a situation that's quite interesting where people are leaving one of the most temperate places in the Southwest because of economic reasons to move to Vegas and Phoenix, which are just getting hotter.
Yeah. Well, people move towards economic opportunity. And, I know that a lot is said about concerns about population growth in Utah and Nevada and Arizona and the desert Southwest. But fundamentally, water use is more closely tied to land use than it is to population. So, for example, it takes about 6 times more water per acre to grow cotton or alfalfa in our hot desert environment than it does to grow a subdivision. And if you provide for populations with vertical development on very small lots, you get really, really water efficient developments, and you can pack a ton of people into those developments without using very much more water. As Arizona's economy has transitioned from largely agricultural to urban, we have seen a natural reduction in water use. The state of Arizona as a whole uses roughly the same amount of water, a little less than what we did in the 1950s, but our population has grown by 6 million. So really, at the end of the day, this is not a conversation about population growth because people move towards opportunity. They're going to go where they want to go. It's a conversation about land use. It's not so much a question about whether we have enough water. It's a question of what we have enough water for and what we most value for those uses.
Mm-hmm. Back to tribes really briefly, as we don't have too much time, and thank you for this. We could spend hours on this topic, and we've been asked to do 15 minutes. But Heather, you mentioned some tribes have been at the table for years, some have not. I think in the news business, we're a little bit guilty of trying to get attention to stories by talking about a looming ecological disaster, because it is, and in fact, it's not looming for some people. But I wanted to ask you, is there hope in what you're seeing, and particularly from the tribal perspective, as voices like those are being elevated, as the Biden administration has at least pledged to give Native Americans more of a seat at the table after not having one for centuries and treaty violations? So what gives you hope?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been a lot of progress in the last couple years. I mean, first of all, we're up here talking about solutions and what to do in response to climate change. That's a big difference from debating whether climate change is even happening. And so now that we've acknowledged the problem, we can come up with creative solutions, and tribes have a lot to bring to the table. Not only are they significant stakeholders in the river, they hold about 25% of the average water flows and tribal water rights, but they have specialized knowledge, ecological knowledge, indigenous science, whatever you want to call it. They have something to bring when we talk about management of the river, how to live with less. Because this isn't a you, me, them problem, it's an us problem. That if we're going to come up with a sustainable future, we have to do it together.
Is there, Kathryn, is there a place, you mentioned about agriculture across the basin uses about 80% of the available water. You could easily just say, well, this isn't a city problem, this is a farming problem. Why are we still growing cotton in the desert? Why are we still growing alfalfa and making pellets for export to Asia when we need the water right here?
You know, it's difficult. Everyone thinks that their own water use is justified and that no one else's is, right? So it's easy to turn around and say, well, this is somebody else's fault. But you know, farmers live in real communities, real people, real economies. Rural spaces are important. Open spaces are important. So as Heather says, we need to find ways to come together and solve these problems collectively and not just play a blame game.
And I guess maybe to you both in the last minute or two that we have left, where do you see this going? I mean, I think historically, if we look backwards, we know that Western water has been litigated. It's headed in the courts anytime there's been a discussion about it's what you've described. It's mine, it's my use, it's mine. Where do you see this going? Because we are in a situation, as I mentioned before, where the states are being told to agree to disagree and use less water, but otherwise federal government's going to tell us what to do instead. So do you see this going anywhere? I shouldn't say do you see it going anywhere. Where do you see it going? Because in that regard, maybe we don't see it going anywhere.
Are you going to take that?
I know, right? I mean, there's to some extent, right? We're running out of water. Like, we have to take action. We've kind of run out of time, and it's, I think, adding on the one hand stress and tension, and everyone is holding their cards very closely to their chests. But at the same time, we're seeing backroom discussions and more people involved in those discussions than we've ever seen before. And just looking at who is attending these meetings, the diverse representation is more than we've ever seen before. So that makes me optimistic that we will get somewhere.
And Kathryn, and is the public, what about all of us? Are you seeing more awareness? We mentioned when we started this conversation, it sort of feels like for those of us parachuting in for a few days that there isn't a crisis, but there really is. It's on the public too, right?
Yeah, I think there is more awareness, and a lot of that is thanks to the kind of reporting we see at NPR and other outlets. I think people do understand the importance of water in their communities, not just in the arid West, but across the country and across this globe. we see water systems that are falling apart because the infrastructure hasn't been maintained. We see communities that have never enjoyed access in the first place. We see new voices coming to the table. We see people doubling down on conservation, the reclamation of wastewater and its reuse. We see really innovative technological solutions coming to the forefront. The challenges before us are great, there's no doubt, but I really am optimistic about the power of human innovation and the power of people coming together and working things out. And I think that's what we're going to do.
Okay, great. It's not all doom and gloom. There is hope in this basin. So thank you guys both.
Thank you.
Okay.